Eleanor Brooks read the note once, folded it, pressed it flat against her palm until the paper creased white at the edges. Then, she picked up her trunk handle with both hands and pulled. The trunk didn't move. 60 pounds of everything she owned stuck on a warped nail in the middle of a train platform in a town she'd never seen before, while every soul in Red Creek, Arizona territory stood watching her like she was a calf that had wandered into the wrong pen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She pulled again. The trunk didn't move. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe right now and follow every part to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far Eleanor's story travels. Now let's go back to that platform, because what happens next will change everything. The train had come into Red Creek at 2:30, right on schedule, rolling in with a long, low whistle that sent dust spinning off the platform boards. Eleanor had been on that train 4 days. She'd eaten stale bread on the second morning and nothing at all on the third. By the time she stepped down onto the platform, her legs felt like borrowed things present, but not entirely reliable. She had told herself not to be nervous. She'd told herself that all the way from Philadelphia through Ohio, through the long, flat middle of the country, through the strange red silence of the desert. A woman with a good education and honest intentions could not possibly be turned away. She had told herself this so many times, the words had worn smooth like river stones. She'd almost believed them. The station master found her before she'd taken 10 steps. He was a short man with a gray mustache and a look on his face that she would remember for the rest of her life. The particular look of a man holding something unpleasant and hoping someone else will take it off his hands. He extended the folded note at arm's length. Miss Brooks, arriving from Philadelphia. I am... He pushed the note forward without meeting her eyes. She took it. She read it. Miss Brooks. I find upon reflection that you are not the woman I require. I was given to understand I would receive a practical and obedient wife suited to frontier life. The photograph you provided was generous in its representation. Your letters suggest opinions I have no interest in managing. I will not be meeting the train. Please make arrangements to return east. R. Hargrove. Eleanor folded the paper back along its crease, pressed it flat against her palm. Around her, the platform had gone the way small towns go when something worth watching happens. Quiet, arranged. The women on the general store porch had stopped their conversation. The man in the feed supply doorway had crossed his arms. 3 boys near the water trough had gone still, watching her the way boys watch something they don't fully understand but know is wrong. She did not cry. Not because she wasn't hurt. She was hurt in a way that hadn't yet reached her face. But she had learned long ago that crying in public gives cruelty a victory it doesn't deserve, and she was not in the habit of giving away victories. She looked at the station master. Is there a boarding house in town? He pulled at his mustache. Mrs. Fenton keeps a room, $2 a night. He paused. She don't usually take in? He stopped, didn't finish. Eleanor calculated without moving her eyes. $14 folded inside her left boot. 7 nights. Enough time to think of something. She was better at problems than most people gave her credit for. That will do, she said. She reached for her trunk handle and pulled. It caught on a warped nail and stopped dead. She repositioned, pulled again. 18 inches. Stopped again. The station master didn't offer to help. The women on the porch didn't move. The man in the feed supply doorway watched with his arms still crossed. Nobody moved. Eleanor set her jaw and pulled a 3rd time. That was when she heard it. Boots on the platform. Unhurried. Deliberate. The stride of a man who doesn't excuse himself for taking up space. She looked up. He was broad through the shoulders, dark-haired with a work-worn hat pushed back, and hands that told the truth about his life, calloused, strong, marked by years of actual labor. 30-some years old. His face was weathered, but not hardened. Serious the way working men are serious, not mean the way some men choose to be. He wasn't looking at the women on the porch. He wasn't looking at the boys at the trough. He walked straight to her trunk, crouched down, checked the side hasp with one hand, and stood up with the whole 60 pounds on his shoulder, like it weighed nothing worth mentioning. He straightened, settled the trunk, looked at the station master. "She'll be staying," he said. "My wife won't be needing tomorrow's train." Nobody breathed. The station master's mouth came open. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me, Harold." His voice was even, the kind of even that doesn't need volume to carry weight. "My wife, her trunk. We're leaving." One of the women on the porch said loud enough to hear, "Did he just say wife?" The other one said, "That's Nathan Carter. I know who it is. Since when does he have a hush?" A man at the edge of the platform, older, leathery someone Eleanor had not noticed before, took one step forward. "Carter," he said, not quite friendly. "That woman came in on Hargrove's ticket." Nathan turned his head, looked at the man, just looked steady and level for 3 full seconds. "That's so," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an argument. It was a door closing quiet and final. The man said nothing else. Nathan looked back at Eleanor then. Direct, steady, brown eyes with something in them she couldn't name, but felt the shape of something that was not pity, and was not charity, and was not anything she'd expected to find on a train platform in a town she'd never seen before. "Ma'am," he said, "my wagon's at the end of the road. When you're ready." Eleanor looked at this man she had never seen before in her life. She looked at her trunk on his shoulder. She looked at the station master's stunned mustache, and the women on the porch, and the man who had just decided to stop talking, and the boys at the trough with their mouths slightly open. She picked up her traveling bag. "I'm ready now," she said. They walked off that platform together, and she did not look back at any of it. Behind her, she heard one of the porch women say quite distinctly, "Well, I never." She kept walking. The sun hit her face when she stepped off the platform roof's shadow, hot and immediate and real. She kept walking. The wagon was a working one, 2 good horses, a bench seat that had carried better decades than this one. Nathan loaded the trunk into the back with efficient care, tied it, came around, and offered his hand. His grip was firm and entirely businesslike. He released her hand the moment she was steady, which she noted. He came around to his side, gathered the reins, clicked the horses forward. They cleared the last building. The road opened into scrub and red rock, and the town fell away behind them like a bad dream, losing its edges. Eleanor let 30 seconds of silence run out. Then she said, "Mr. Carter." "Nathan." "Mr. Carter," she repeated precisely. "You told the entire town of Red Creek that I am your wife. I'd like an explanation for that." He kept his eyes on the road. "Fair enough." He was quiet a moment. "I had business at the feed store. I was passing through when I saw you on that platform reading that note." He paused. "I've known Randall Hargrove my whole life. And I know what kind of man sends a note like that instead of showing up himself." "What kind of man is that?" "The cowardly kind." He said it flatly, without drama. "The kind who thinks a woman who traveled 2,000 miles deserves to be turned away in front of an audience." Eleanor absorbed that. "So you acted on principle?" "Partly." "And the other part?" He thought about it. Genuinely thought, not the way men perform thinking when they want to seem reasonable, but the way a man thinks when he's trying to say the true thing correctly. A respectable unmarried woman alone in Red Creek with nowhere to go is going to have trouble, he said. That's not a commentary on you. That's just the truth of how this country works. "I see." She watched the desert go past. "And the man who spoke up? The one you looked at?" "Clem Draper. He works for Hargrove." Eleanor turned that over. "So Hargrove will know by sundown that someone claimed me?" "Yes." "And will that cause you difficulty?" Nathan was quiet for a moment longer than the question required. "Hargrove and I have a disagreement about water rights that's been running 2 years, he said. He's been looking for leverage. He won't find it in this." "Are you certain?" "I'm certain of what I intend," he said. "The rest we'll manage as it comes." She studied the side of his face, the jaw, the set of it. "Mr. Carter, I need to understand what you're actually proposing." Because right now, what I understand is that you've told an entire town a very significant thing about a woman you have never met, for reasons that are partly principled and partly strategic, and now you're driving that woman to your ranch. So I'd like the full version, if you please. He almost smiled. Not quite. The full version, he said, is that my ranch house is falling apart. My records haven't been properly kept in 3 years. My cook left in March. I've got a good foreman and 400 head of cattle and a water dispute that's bleeding me dry, and I am running out of time to fix it. He glanced at her. I need someone who can run a household and keep accounts. I'm offering honest work a fair wage in your own room. Nothing more. Nothing asked that you haven't agreed to. And the wife business protects your reputation in town, gives you standing, means nobody bothers you. He paused. If you want to think on it overnight and get on that train tomorrow morning, I'll drive you to the depot myself. And tell them whatever you'd like me to tell them. Including the truth. Including the truth. She was quiet. She thought about the $14 in her boot. She thought about the note in her bag. She thought about the station master's mustache and the women on the porch and the boy by the trough who had laughed. She thought about the way Nathan Carter had walked across that platform and lifted 60 pounds of her life onto his shoulder without hesitating and without asking for anything in return and without looking to see who was watching. Tell me about the water dispute, she said. He looked at her sidelong. Beg pardon? The water dispute with Hargrove. You said it's bleeding you dry. I want to understand it. A pause. You want to talk about water rights. I want to understand the full situation before I agree to anything, she said. I have a degree in accounting and business correspondence from the Philadelphia Female Seminary. My father was a solicitor. I grew up reading contracts and correspondence. If Hargrove has been trying to acquire your water access for 2 years, there's a legal strategy underneath it. I'd like to know what it is. Nathan Carter looked at her for 3 full seconds. The horses kept moving. The desert kept going. Huh, he said. Is that relevant to your employment offer? Yes, ma'am, he said. Considerably. Then we'll discuss the water rights. And I'll need to see the bank correspondence and whatever written offers Hargrove has made. Tonight, if possible. Tonight, he repeated like a man testing whether he'd heard correctly. I don't see the value in delay, she said. Do you? No, he said slowly. I reckon I don't. She folded her hands in her lap. The note from Randall Hargrove was in her traveling bag. She had not thrown it away. She had learned long ago that documents, even cruel ones, become useful in ways you can't always anticipate. I have conditions, she said. Go ahead. My room is my own. No one enters without invitation. Agreed. I am addressed as Miss Brooks by the ranch hands until I decide otherwise. He raised an eyebrow. You just told me you'd be known as my wife in town. In town, appearances serve a purpose. On your ranch, I am your employee. Miss Brooks until I say different. Agreed, he said. And this time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not much. Enough. And you will tell me the true state of this ranch, she said. Not the version that sounds better than it is. Not the version you'd tell the bank. The version that is actually true. He was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, that's the one I find hardest to tell. I know, she said. Tell it anyway. Silver Creek Ranch came into view as the light went sideways and gold. She saw it from the road, the main house, long and low porch sagging at one end. Barn in better repair than the house. Fences mended in some places and badly needing it in others. A garden plot half dead from the heat. A windmill turning in the evening breeze with a squeak that wanted oil. She didn't say what she was thinking. She never said everything she was thinking. That was a habit of survival, not deception. What she was thinking was that the place had been abandoned from the inside, long before it started falling apart from the outside, and that was a specific kind of neglect she understood, because she had seen it happen to her father's house after her mother died, and the grief took the heart out of every room. What she said was, "How long has the porch post been like that?" Nathan looked. "Since last winter." "It needs replacing before it gives way. That's a safety matter, not an aesthetic one." "Yes, ma'am," A man came from the direction of the barn, compact, dark-haired, somewhere in his 40s, with the quick, watchful eyes of someone who reads situations fast and files them away for later. He pulled his hat off. "Miguel," Nathan said, "this is Miss Brooks. She'll be staying on running the house and the accounts." Miguel's eyes moved over Eleanor with careful, respectful assessment. "Ma'am," he said, "welcome to Silver Creek. Mr. Alvarez." She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to walk the property with you tomorrow morning before the heat sets in. I need to understand the operational situation from your perspective, not just the paperwork." Miguel blinked, looked at Nathan. Nathan was looking at a point somewhere above the barn with the expression of a man who has decided to let events proceed without his assistance. "Yes, ma'am," Miguel said. "I can do that." "Thank you." She picked up her traveling bag and walked up the porch steps, stepping deliberately on the sagging end to test it, feeling it give more than she liked, and went inside. The house was worse than it looked from outside, which was what she'd expected. Dark kitchen, dusty stove, a table buried under 3 years of unsorted papers. 2 windows with curtains half fallen. A cold lamp that needed trimming. The kind of room that had stopped being lived in and started simply being occupied, which was a different thing entirely. She set her bag on this table. She took off her traveling coat. She rolled up her sleeves. She found the lamp and trimmed the wick and got it burning, and in the warm circle of its light, she looked at the stacked papers and the buried table and the sagging curtains, and did not feel despair. She felt something closer to recognition. Nathan appeared in the doorway, with her trunk set against the wall without being asked, and looked at her standing at the cold stove with her sleeves up, already working out where to begin. "You can rest tonight," he said. The books can wait," she agreed. "The lamp can't, the stove can't, and I need paper." He found paper without arguing. She sat at the table, moved the stacked documents carefully to one side. She would sort them in order, but not tonight, and drew a clean sheet toward her. "All right, Mr. Carter," she said. "Sit down. Bank letter first, then the Hargrove correspondence. Then you're going to tell me everything about this ranch, what it was before the trouble, what happened, and what you honestly believe it can still become." She looked up at him across the lamp. "The true version. Remember." He sat down. The lamp burned between them, throwing gold across the table and the papers and both their faces. He reached into his jacket and set the bank letter down. He looked at it for the moment, then at her. "Nobody's asked me for the true version in a long time," he said. "I'm asking," she said. He took a breath. "It started with the drought," he said. 1881. We lost a third of the herd in the first year and another quarter the year after. I borrowed against the land to keep the operation running. Then the bank changed hands in Tucson, and the new men called the note early." He stopped. "Then my father died, and after that He stopped again, differently this time. Eleanor waited. She didn't fill the silence. She had learned that silence used correctly is more useful than any question. "After that I kept the cattle alive and let everything else go," he said. "The house, the records, the legal business with Hargrove, and the water. I kept thinking I'd get to it." He looked at the bank letter on the table. "I didn't get to it." "No," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "But we're getting to it now." She picked up her pen, opened the bank letter, read the number at the top, the true number, the one the bank had written in clear, plain figures, and did not flinch, because flinching didn't solve problems, and she was here to solve problems. "Tell me about the water rights," she said. "Start from the beginning. Every detail." And Nathan Carter, who had not told the full truth of Silver Creek Ranch to another living person in 3 years, put both hands flat on the table and started talking. Outside, the windmill turned in the dark, still squeaking. The desert cooled. The first stars came up hard and bright a long way from Philadelphia. Inside, the lamp burned steady, and a woman who had been told she was not what anyone required was writing in clear, careful figures the first honest account Silver Creek had seen in years. She didn't know yet what she was really building. Nathan Carter, watching her write, was beginning to. Nathan was still talking when the lamp burned low enough that Eleanor had to trim it a second time. She didn't ask him to stop. She kept writing, kept asking the next question and the one after that. and he kept answering with the kind of honesty that comes out of a man. Slowly, the way water comes out of cracked ground. Reluctant at first, then faster, then all at once, like something long held back, has finally found its release. The drought had started in the spring of 1881. He explained it without self-pity, which she respected. A third of the herd dead in the first year, another quarter gone the second. The creek had dropped to a trickle by midsummer, and the cattle were dying faster than he could sell them. He'd borrowed against the land twice, once from the bank in Tucson, and once from a private note holder, whose name he said quietly, and Eleanor wrote it down without comment. His father had been alive then, and his father had said the land would come back, the creek would come back, it always had. And his father had been right about the creek. He had not lived to see it. When did he die? Eleanor asked. February of 1882, Nathan said. Fever, quick. I'm sorry. He didn't suffer long. He said it the way men say things they have made their peace with by saying them enough times. After that, He stopped, looked at his hands on the table. After that, I kept the cattle alive. That was all I managed. That's not nothing, Eleanor said. It wasn't enough either. She looked at him across the lamp. No, but it kept the ranch alive to be saved. That matters. She turned back to the paper. The private note holder. Silas Crane. What are the terms? Nathan looked up. You wrote that down. I write everything down, she said. The terms, Mr. Carter, he told her. The interest rate was not legal by any standard she knew from her father's practice, but she said nothing about that yet. She wrote the number down and put a small mark beside it that meant she would return to it. And the bank in Tucson. Who holds the note now? Man named Gerald Prentice. Took over when the previous bank management sold their interest 18 months ago. He said the name with a flatness that told her more than the name itself. Prentice has been patient, in his way. In his way, she repeated. What does that mean precisely? It means he hasn't called the full note yet, but he's sent 3 letters in the past 6 months suggesting he's considering his options. May I see those letters? Nathan got up, went to the far side of the room where a wooden crate sat against the wall with papers folded inside it in no particular order, and brought the whole crate to the table. He set it down without apology. I know it's a mess. Eleanor looked at the crate. Has anyone gone through this? Not since my father. She put her hand into the crate and lifted out the top layer of documents carefully, the way you handle something fragile that doesn't know it's fragile. Then we start here, she said. Tonight we sort. Tomorrow we assess. By the end of the week, I'll have a picture of where the ranch actually stands. It's past 10 o'clock, Nathan said. I'm aware. You've been traveling for 4 days. I'm aware of that too. She looked up at him. Mr. Carter, if I go to sleep now, I will lie in an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar house, and think about everything in this crate that I haven't read yet. I would rather read it. With your permission. He looked at her for a long moment. Something crossed his face, not quite amusement, not quite admiration, something that didn't have a clean name, and he sat back down and pulled the crate toward him and began sorting the documents into 2 piles without being asked. They worked in silence for 2 hours. Eleanor read sorted and made notes in her clear, careful hand. Nathan found the documents she asked for and answered the questions she put to him with increasing directness, as if the act of going through the papers had loosened something in him. By midnight, she had a ledger page covered in figures and 3 separate columns of notations and a list of 7 items in order of urgency. The Prentice letters were the first urgency. She read all 3 carefully twice. Then she read them a 3rd time. Mr. Carter, she said. Nathan, Mr. Carter. These letters are not patience. This is preparation. She set the 3rd letter down and turned it toward him. Do you see this language here? We find ourselves obligated to review the terms of the existing agreement in light of current property valuations. That is not a banker being patient. That is a banker who has already had the property valued and is building the legal record he needs to call the note on favorable terms. Nathan looked at the letter, looked at her. You got all that from 1 sentence. My father spent 20 years in contract law, she said. I spent 20 years reading over his shoulder. She picked up her pen. Who did the valuation? I don't know that anyone. Someone did. Prentice didn't write that sentence without a number in front of him. She made a note. We need to find out who conducted that valuation and when. And we need our own independent assessment on record before Prentice moves. She looked up. Do you have an attorney? Had one. He moved to Santa Fe 2 years ago. Then we'll need one. She added it to the list. The Hargrove water dispute. Tell me all of it. Start with the original boundary line. Nathan leaned forward, and for the next 40 minutes, he talked about water and land, and the particular bitterness that grows between neighboring ranches when one man decides the rules don't apply to him. Charles Whitmore Hargrove. Third-generation money, which in the Arizona Territory of 1884 meant his grandfather had arrived early enough to claim the good land before the law caught up with the claiming. The Silver Creek's South Branch ran through a corner of the Hargrove property before it reached the Carter land. For 30 years there had been an informal agreement. The water flowed free. Both ranches used it. Nobody made trouble. Then Hargrove's father died 2 years before Nathan's, and Charles came back from wherever he'd been spending the family money. Looked at the land with fresh eyes and decided the informal agreement was a charity he no longer wished to extend. He dammed the South Branch in the spring of 1882, Nathan said. Right after the drought broke. Said the water on his land was his water, and if I wanted access, I could negotiate for it. Did you have the informal agreement in writing anywhere? It was a handshake between my father and his. Witnesses. Miguel was there for one conversation, maybe others who've since moved on. Eleanor made notes. What did Hargrove offer when he said negotiate? He offered to sell me water access rights for a figure that was half the value of my cattle operation. In writing. He sent a letter. I have it somewhere in... It's in this stack, Eleanor said, and pulled it from the sorted pile on her left without looking up. She'd set it aside an hour ago. She unfolded it and read it again. Then she read it a third time, with the slow, careful attention she gave to things that were trying to look like one thing while being another. Mr. Carter, she said, what is it? She set the letter flat on the table and smoothed it with her palm. This letter is not about water rights. He looked at her. What do you mean? Read the third paragraph, specifically the part where he discusses what he would accept in lieu of the monetary figure. She slid the letter toward him and waited. Nathan read it. She watched his face. She watched the moment the meaning arrived, a slight stillness around his eyes, the way a man goes quiet when something he thought was one shape turns out to be another. He wants the North grazing land, Nathan said. He wants the North grazing land, Eleanor confirmed. The water rights negotiation is leverage. What he actually wants is the parcel that sits between his eastern boundary and the creek. That parcel, if he holds it, gives him uncontested access to the full Silver Creek without needing your cooperation at all. She folded her hands. The water dispute isn't about water, it's about land acquisition. The water is the method, the land is the goal. The room was quiet for a moment. He's been running this for 2 years, Nathan said slowly. It wasn't a question. Since he came back and looked at the map with fresh eyes, Eleanor said. Yes. She picked up her pen. Did you ever have the North Parcel's boundaries formally surveyed? My father had it done in 1874. Is the survey document in this crate? Nathan looked at the crate, looked at her. If it's anywhere, it's there. Then we'll find it, she said. And she went back to the papers. She found the survey document at 20 minutes past midnight, folded inside a water-stained envelope that had been at the very bottom of the crate beneath 3 years of correspondence. She unfolded it carefully, laid it flat, and studied it in the lamplight. Then she sat back in her chair for the first time in 2 hours. Mr. Carter, she said, the North Parcel boundary runs 12 feet further south than Hargrove's letter assumes. Nathan went very still. Say that again, Your father's 1874 survey places the southern boundary of the north parcel 12 feet further south than the line Hargrove is using as his reference point. If his letter is based on the boundary he believes exists, then his entire claim about the water access is built on a measurement that isn't accurate. She set the survey down carefully, precisely the way her father had taught her to set down a document that mattered, which means his legal position is weaker than he knows. Nathan stared at the survey. Then he looked at Eleanor. His face in the lamplight was the face of a man absorbing something large, something that rearranges the shape of a problem he has been carrying for 2 years. "You found that in 2 hours," he said. "I found it in 2 hours because nobody had looked," she said. "That's not a particular skill of mine. That's what happens when someone actually reads the documents." "Eleanor." He stopped. "I beg your pardon, Miss Brooks." "It's all right," she said. And she was surprised to find she meant it. He leaned forward. "Miss Brooks, if what you're saying is correct about the boundary, about Hargrove's real intention, that changes how I respond to Prentice too. Prentice and Hargrove are both circling the same piece of land. If Hargrove gets the north parcel, the ranch loses creek access and half its grazing value. That's when Prentice calls the note. That's why he's been patient." Eleanor looked at him. "You just put that together right now." "Just now, yes. That's the correct reading," she said quietly. She looked at the papers between them, the bank letters, the Hargrove correspondence, the survey document, her own notes filling 2 pages. "Mr. Carter, you don't have a water dispute and a bank debt. You have a coordinated effort to devalue this property until it can be acquired cheaply. Prentice holds the financial pressure. Hargrove holds the water pressure. Together they squeeze until something gives." The silence that followed was the specific silence of truth that has been spoken out loud for the first time. "How long have they been working together?" Nathan asked. "I don't know yet, but this," she tapped the 3rd Prentice letter, "was written 3 weeks after Hargrove's last offer to you. That timing is not coincidental." She looked up. "Do you trust the sheriff in Red Creek?" Nathan's expression answered before he did. "Tom Aldridge is Hargrove's cousin by marriage. Then we go to the territorial court in Tucson," she said. "We go with the survey document, the bank correspondence, and a timeline showing the coordination between Prentice and Hargrove. We establish the boundary before anything else moves." She picked up her pen. "I'll need 3 days to prepare the documentation. Can you stall Prentice if he contacts you before then?" He looked at her across the lamp. Really looked the way he had on the platform, direct, steady, but different now. Not the way a man looks at a woman in trouble. The way a man looks at someone he is trying to understand. "You walked off a train this afternoon with $14 and a letter telling you you weren't good enough," he said. "And right now you're sitting in my kitchen at midnight telling me how to save my ranch. Someone has to," she said simply. "Are you going to help me, or are you going to be surprised?" He almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when something catches him sideways and he wasn't prepared for it. "Both," he said. "I can do both at the same time." "Good," she said. "Then let's keep going." They worked until past 1 in the morning. By the time Eleanor finally set down her pen, she had 4 pages of notes, a timeline of events running back 18 months, a list of documents that needed certified copies, and a clear sense of what needed to happen and in what order. She had also, without quite intending to, learned the name of every cowdog Nathan had owned since he was 12 years old. The reason his father had chosen this particular piece of Arizona over 3 others he'd considered, and the fact that Nathan Carter had been engaged once 8 years ago to a woman named Clara, who had decided the frontier was not for her and gone back to St. Louis before the first winter was out. She hadn't asked about Clara. He'd told her himself, somewhere in the middle of the 3rd Prentice letter, in the way people tell things when they're tired enough that the usual guards are down. She wasn't wrong, he'd said briefly. It's a hard life. Eleanor had not said anything. She'd written down a figure from the letter and moved on. In the morning she woke before dawn, which she always did, and lay in the unfamiliar room listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Boots on dirt. The low voices of men starting the day. a horse in the near paddock, the windmill still squeaking. She dressed, pinned her hair with the efficiency of a woman who has never had time to make it complicated, and went to the kitchen. The stove was cold. She found the wood box, found the kindling, and had the fire going by the time light was beginning at the window. She found flour salt and a tin of lard that was still good. She found dried beans that had been there long enough to need sorting. She sorted them while the stove heated, which took 12 minutes, which she filled by reviewing in her mind everything she'd written the night before, and the order in which it needed to be addressed. By the time Nathan came in at 6:30, there was coffee, cornbread, and a pot of beans started for the noon meal. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, which was clear for the first time in what appeared to be a considerable while. "You didn't need to." "I was awake," she said. "Sit down. I have questions about the fence line on the east boundary." He sat down. He drank coffee. He answered her questions. Outside, Miguel organized the morning's work with the efficiency of a man who has been keeping this operation alive on pure stubbornness, and the sound of it, the movement, the purpose, the ordinary industry of a working ranch came through the kitchen walls and filled the room with something Eleanor hadn't expected to feel this soon. Something like belonging. She pushed the feeling aside. She was too careful for feelings that arrived before they'd been earned. Miguel came to the door at 7. He pulled his hat off. "Miss Brooks, still want to walk the property?" "Yes," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." She walked the Silver Creek property for 2 hours that morning, and what she saw confirmed what the papers had told her. The ranch was in trouble, real trouble, but it was the kind of trouble that comes from neglect and bad luck and grief, rather than from any fundamental failure of the land itself. The creek ran clear. The north pasture was good grass. The cattle were lean but healthy. The fences needed work. The barn roof needed 2 new sections. The kitchen garden was barely alive, but the soil beneath it was dark and deep and had not given up. "How long since anyone properly worked the garden?" she asked Miguel. "Cook left in March," he said. "Before that she kept it going. It was her thing." "It can come back," Eleanor said. "The soil's good." Miguel looked at her sideways. "You know gardens. My mother did," she said. "I helped her." She crouched down, pressed her fingers into the soil at the edge of the bed, felt the moisture beneath the dry surface crust. "There's water in the ground still. It just needs working." Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, as if testing the words, "The men were talking this morning." "I imagine they were." "About how you came to be here." Eleanor stood up, brushed the soil from her fingers, and looked at him directly. "And Tom Briggs. He's one of the hands. He said Hargrove's man Clem Draper was in the feed store yesterday evening. Said Hargrove's planning to come to town for the Harvest Festival next month, and that he's planning to make a formal complaint to the county records office about some boundary irregularities." Eleanor went very still. Boundary irregularities. That's what Draper was saying, around a few of the locals. She looked at Miguel. He was watching her with those quick, careful eyes. "Mr. Alvarez, how well do you know the county records clerk? Sam Hooper. Known him 20 years. Is he an honest man?" "Honest enough. He follows whoever's in the room with him, though. If Hargrove gets to him first, Hargrove won't get there first," Eleanor said. "How quickly can you get me to the county records office?" "It's in Maricopa. Half-day's ride." "Can we go tomorrow?" Miguel looked at her for a moment. "I'll have the wagon ready at 5, he said. She nodded. She turned back to the garden, calculating. Hargrove was moving faster than she'd assumed, which meant he'd been more ready than she'd given him credit for. The boundary challenge at the county records office was the first move. Get his version of the line on record before the survey document could be filed. He didn't know they had the survey document. That was the only advantage they had, and it was time-sensitive. She went back to the house and found Nathan coming in from the cattle pens. She told him what Miguel had said. She watched his face go from tired to sharp in the space of 3 seconds. "He's filing a boundary claim," Nathan said. "He's preparing to. He hasn't filed yet, or he wouldn't be talking about it through Draper. He's letting it travel through town first, which means he wants people positioned before it becomes official." She looked at Nathan steadily. Miguel and I can be at the county records office by noon tomorrow if we leave at 5. I want to file a certified copy of the 1874 survey and request a formal boundary verification before Hargrove submits anything. Once our record is there, first his claim becomes a challenge to an established document rather than a competing claim. That's a much harder legal position for him. Nathan looked at her. Miguel told you he'd have the wagon at 5. Yes. Before you'd told me any of this. I needed to know if it was feasible before I brought it to you, she said. It is feasible. Do I have your authorization to file on behalf of Silver Creek Ranch? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who doubted her. The quiet of a man who was recalibrating the shape of a situation he had been managing alone for 2 years, and was now still cautiously, still carefully adjusting to the idea that he wasn't managing it alone anymore. You have it, he said. She left for Maricopa the next morning at 5 with Miguel driving and the 1874 survey document wrapped in oilcloth in her traveling bag, along with every piece of relevant correspondence she'd sorted from the crate. The road was dark for the first hour, and the desert was cold before the sun came up cold, in the way it only is in the desert, where the heat has nowhere to store itself overnight. She sat straight on the wagon bench with her coat buttoned and her hands folded in her lap and went over every document in her mind in the order she would present them. Miguel drove without speaking for the first hour. Then he said, "How long were you a solicitor's clerk?" "I wasn't," she said. "I was his daughter." "Same thing sounds like." He would have said so, she said, and felt for a moment the particular ache of missing someone who had been dead long enough that the missing was quiet most of the time, but not always. Miguel nodded, said nothing more for a while. Then, "Nathan's a good man." "I believe that," she said. "He's had a hard 3 years." "I know." "He doesn't—" Miguel stopped, started again. "He doesn't ask for help easily. Yesterday when he told the boys you were looking at the accounts, Tom Briggs wanted to know if Nathan was sure about that. Nathan said yes, just yes, no explanation. He doesn't do that. Trust easy, I mean." Eleanor looked at the road ahead. The sky was beginning to lighten at the horizon. "Mr. Alvarez, are you telling me this so I'll be careful with it?" Miguel considered. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm telling you so you know what it means." She looked at him. He was watching the road. His face in the early light was the face of a man who has been loyal to one place and one person for a long time, and knows exactly what that loyalty is worth. "I understand," she said. Sam Hooper at the county records office was a small man with wire spectacles and the cautious manner of someone who has learned that paperwork lasts longer than people. He looked at Eleanor across his counter with polite skepticism that changed document by document into something approaching professional respect. She laid out the survey first, then the chain of ownership, then the correspondence timeline she'd prepared the night before, clear and chronological, and annotated in the margins with the specific legal references her father had taught her, applied in territorial land disputes. "This survey," Hooper said, looking at the 1874 document with his spectacles pushed up. "This is original. Yes, sir. Conducted by a licensed territorial surveyor. You'll find his registration number in the margin. I'd ask that you verify it in your records." Hooper looked at the number, went to a ledger behind him, came back. "He's registered." He looked at Eleanor with an expression that had gone from cautious to curious. "Ma'am, you said you wanted to file a boundary verification request. That's an unusual step to take without an active dispute on record." "I understand," Eleanor said. "I'm filing it in anticipation of a dispute being initiated. That is a legal option, yes." "It is." He studied her. "You've done this kind of thing before." "My father was a solicitor," she said. "I learned what was necessary." Hooper stamped the survey log, the verification request, and gave her the certified copies she'd asked for with the office seal and the date. Eleanor checked each one, folded them carefully, and put them in the oilcloth case. Walking out of the county records office with Miguel at her side, and the certified documents in her bag, she felt the specific satisfaction of a problem solved before it became a crisis. It was the same feeling she remembered from her father's office, the quiet rightness of having the right document in the right place at the right time. "Done?" Miguel asked. "The first part," she said. "Yes." They were back at Silver Creek by late afternoon. Nathan was in the paddock when they drove in working with one of the younger horses, and he came to the fence when he heard the wagon. His eyes went to Eleanor's face first, and she gave him a single nod, which was enough. "It's filed," she said. "Certified copies. Dated today. If Hargrove submits anything to Hooper now, he's challenging an existing verified document." Nathan looked at the fence post for a moment. He had the expression of a man who has been bracing for a wall for 2 years and has just discovered there might be a door in it. "How did Hooper take it?" he asked. "He was professional," she said. "And he'll be less inclined to accommodate Hargrove now that there's a prior filing on record. People like Sam Hooper follow precedent. We've given him a precedent." Nathan looked at her. Then at Miguel, who had the look of a man who has witnessed something and has filed it carefully under things worth remembering. "All right," Nathan said quietly. "All right." He turned back to the horse, then turned back. "Thank you, Miss Brooks." She was already walking toward the house. "Thank the survey team from 1874, she said without turning. "They did the real work." She heard what might have been a quiet laugh behind her. She kept walking. That evening, she made supper properly for the first time, cornbread again, and fried salt pork and the beans she'd started that morning, now rich and well seasoned. She set the table with what she found, which was plain but adequate, and called the hands for supper with the same practicality she brought to everything. Tom Briggs sat at the far end of the table and watched her the way men watch something they haven't decided about yet. He was young, not quite 25, and had the kind of face that showed every thought he had before he could stop it. He'd been friendly enough in a guarded way since she'd arrived, but friendly the way a man is when he's withholding judgment rather than when he's actually decided. She was passing the cornbread when he said quite suddenly, "Miss Brooks, is it true you went to the county records office today?" The table went quiet in a particular way. "Yes," she said. "I filed a boundary verification on behalf of the ranch." "Clem Draper was in town this afternoon," Tom said. "Word is, Hargrove's real unhappy." "I imagine he is," Eleanor said pleasantly. Tom looked at Nathan. Nathan was eating. Tom looked back at Eleanor. "You know Hargrove's the most powerful man in this county." "I know he believes that," she said. "Pass the salt, please." Tom passed the salt. He watched her for another moment. Then something in his face settled, shifted, moved from reservation to something that was cautiously close to respect. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and reached for the cornbread. After supper, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was quiet, Nathan came back inside to find Eleanor at the table again with her notes. He sat down and she poured him coffee without being asked. "Draper was seen talking to Hooper this afternoon," he said. She looked up. "When? About an hour after you left the office. Hooper apparently told him there was an existing filing on the boundary, and he couldn't accept a competing claim without a formal dispute process." Nathan looked at her. "Draper left without filing anything." Eleanor sat back. "Good." "That was close. An hour is closer than I'd like," she agreed. "Hargrove will find another approach. This buys us time, not resolution." She turned back to her notes. "I've been looking at the Prentice correspondence again. There's a pattern in the dates. Prentice's first letter suggesting the property review was dated March 15th. Hargrove's last offer to you was March 3rd. The gap is 12 days. "They talked," Nathan said. "Yes, and I think I know who introduced them." She tapped a name in her notes. "Your previous attorney before he moved to Santa Fe. He had dealings with both Prentice's predecessor at the bank and Hargrove's family. He would have known the value of the water parcel and both men's interests." Nathan stared at the note. "James Whitfield. That's speculation, not proof," Eleanor said carefully. "But if it's accurate, it means this arrangement between Prentice and Hargrove is older than 2 years. It may go back to before your father died." She looked at him. It may have started the moment the drought weakened this ranch enough to make it worth acquiring. The quiet that followed was a different kind of quiet than they'd had before. Not the quiet of two people working comfortably together. The quiet of something large and cold, becoming clear for the first time. They waited for the drought, Nathan said. They may have, she said. Or the drought gave them an opportunity they recognized. Either way. She picked up her pen, set it down again. Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. She looked at him. How much of this ranch is worth saving to you, not financially, not practically? How much does it matter to you personally? He didn't answer quickly. He looked at his coffee, out the window at the dark, back at the table. My grandfather built the first house on this land, he said. Not the one that's here now, the original 1-2 rooms that burned in a grass fire in 1861. My father built this house in 1863. I was born in this house. My mother died in this house. He was quiet. My father is buried on the North Ridge under the cottonwood he planted the year he arrived. Then we save it, Eleanor said, simply, without drama. The way you say a thing you mean. He looked at her across the table. The lamp was between them again, throwing the same circle of gold it had the night before, and she thought that in the past 24 hours, she had probably learned more about this man than some people learn about someone in a year. And she wasn't sure what to do with that, except continue being useful, which was what she knew how to do. Why? He asked. Not ungrateful, genuinely asking. She thought about it honestly. Because it's a solvable problem, she said. And because no one should lose something their grandfather built, because two greedy men saw a weakness and decided to take advantage of it. She looked at her notes. And because I have nowhere else to be. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Then he said very quietly, I'm glad I picked up the trunk. She looked up. The lamp was between them. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that neither one of them named, because they were both too careful and too honest to name things before they were sure of them. So am I, she said, and went back to her notes. Outside, the windmill had stopped squeaking. Someone Nathan, she suspected, because she had heard him moving around the yard after supper, had oiled it. It turned in the night wind, now smooth and quiet the way things work when someone has finally paid them proper attention. She wrote until the lamp needed trimming a third time. She trimmed it. She wrote until the oil ran low. Then she put down her pen, organized the papers neatly, and went to bed in the room that was her own, in the house that was beginning very carefully, very slowly, to feel like something more than just a place she had nowhere else to go. She did not let herself think too much about that yet. She was too careful for that. But she thought about it a little. 3 weeks into Eleanor's time at Silver Creek, Nathan stopped pretending he didn't watch for her in the mornings. He told himself it was practical. She was up before anyone else had coffee going, before the hands stumbled out of the bunkhouse, and by the time he came in from the first check on the cattle, she had already reviewed whatever was on the day's list and had a set of questions waiting. It was efficient. That was all. A man running a struggling ranch naturally gravitates toward the one person in his operation who is making progress. He told himself that. He mostly believed it. Eleanor, for her part, had established a rhythm in 3 weeks that the ranch had not seen in years. The kitchen garden was alive again. She and the youngest hand, a 16-year-old boy named Eli, who had more energy than sense, had spent 4 mornings turning the soil and replanting from the seed stock she'd found in a crate in the barn. The main house had curtains in all 3 windows. The table was clear every morning. The accounts were organized into a ledger system she'd built from scratch, clean and legible, with monthly summaries and a running column for the bank debt that showed for the first time not just what was owed, but what was achievable. Miguel had stopped looking at her with cautious assessment. He looked at her now the way he looked at the creek in spring, with the quiet approval of a man who has been worried about something for a long time and has finally seen it stabilize. Tom Briggs had started taking his hat off when he came in for meals, which he had not done for the previous cook. He didn't know he was doing it. Eleanor did not point it out. What she was less prepared for was Hargrove. She had known he would come. She had counted on it, in fact had told Nathan that the boundary filing would force Hargrove to react visibly, and that visible reactions produce evidence. She had prepared for a legal countermove for another letter through official channels for the slow machinery of a man who has resources and is used to being patient. She had not prepared for him to walk through the front door of the Red Creek General Store on a Wednesday morning while she was buying thread and salt. She heard him before she saw him. His voice carried the particular quality of a man who has never learned to modulate himself for enclosed spaces, because he has spent his life in rooms where everything was arranged for his comfort. Don't care what Hooper says. The man has no authority to accept a filing without checking the original deed of record, and if he'd done his job properly. Eleanor kept her hands on the bolt of thread she'd been examining. She did not turn around. She listened. The Carter woman is behind it. That was a different voice. Draper, she thought. Clem Draper. She went there herself with Alvarez. Hooper said she had papers. What papers? Survey from 1874. A pause. A pause of the specific quality she had learned to recognize the pause of a man recalibrating. That survey was filed with the territorial office in Tucson, Hargrove said, not the county. Apparently the old man Carter had a copy. Another pause, longer. Where did she find it? Don't know. She went through the ranch records. Must have. Eleanor turned around. Charles Whitmore Hargrove was taller than she'd imagined from his letter. His letter had the voice of a smaller man, she'd always thought, because small men need bigger words to fill the space. In person, he was lean, well-dressed for a ranch county with silver at his temples, and the kind of face that had probably been handsome at 30 and had since arranged itself into something harder. He looked at her with immediate recognition, which told her Draper had described her well. "Miss Brooks," he said. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Good morning." He looked at her, the way he'd written about her, with the assessing, dismissive gaze of a man who has decided before looking what he expects to see. He was revising that decision right now, she could see it, and he did not like the revision. "I wasn't aware Carter had taken on a bookkeeper," he said. "He hadn't before," she said pleasantly. "He does now. I understand you've been involving yourself in legal matters that concern this county." "I've been handling ranch business," she said, "as is appropriate for someone in my position." "And what position is that?" She looked at him steadily. "The position of someone who has read the documents, Mr. Hargrove. All of them." She let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. "Will that be a problem?" His jaw tightened. It was small a man like Hargrove doesn't let things reach his face easily, but she was watching for it. "Carter is a stubborn fool who's been sitting on valuable land and letting it deteriorate for 3 years, he said. "Whatever arrangement you think you've made with him, it doesn't change the facts on the ground." "The facts on the ground," Eleanor said, "include a certified boundary survey filed with the county records office 4 days ago. That's also a fact on the ground." Draper shifted beside Hargrove. Hargrove's eyes moved to the counterwoman, a stout woman named Ada, who had been pretending to sort receipts for the last 2 minutes. Hargrove looked back at Eleanor. "I'd be careful if I were you," he said. His voice had dropped. Not threatening, he was too careful for open threats in public spaces. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that wants to suggest things without being accountable for them. "I am always careful," Eleanor said. "Good day, Mr. Hargrove." She turned back to the counter. "Ada, I'll take the thread and the salt, and 2 yards of that blue cotton if you have it." She heard Hargrove leave. She heard Draper follow. She let out a breath she hadn't entirely known she was holding slow and controlled, and kept her hands steady on the counter. Ada looked at her with wide eyes. "Lord, honey," she said. "You just said that to Charles Hargrove's face." "I said very little," Eleanor said. "You said enough." Ada began cutting the blue cotton. Her hands were shaking slightly, which Eleanor found more informative than anything Hargrove himself had said. If Ada was frightened by that exchange, it was because she had seen what happened to people who spoke plainly to Hargrove before. "You be careful going home," Ada said quietly. Eleanor paid for her goods, picked up her basket, and walked back to the wagon she'd left at the hitching post. She sat on the bench for a moment before she picked up the reins. Hargrove had not known about the 1874 survey copy. That was clear from his reaction. He'd known the survey existed, it was filed in Tucson, as he'd said. But he had not known Nathan's father had kept a second copy, and he had not anticipated that anyone would go through the ranch records carefully enough to find it. Which meant his entire legal approach to the boundary dispute had been built on the assumption that Silver Creek's records were as disorganized as they appeared. She drove back to the ranch faster than she'd come. Nathan was at the fence when she pulled in, working a line of posts that needed resetting with Tom Briggs. He looked up when he heard the wagon. She had a particular way of coming in when things were urgent, not fast enough to alarm, but not slow either, and he'd learned it in 3 weeks without knowing he'd learned it. He was at the wagon by the time she stopped. Hargrove was in town, she said. Nathan's expression didn't change. When? 20 minutes ago. General store. She climbed down. He didn't know about the survey copy. He knew a survey existed, but he thought it was only in the Tucson records. When Draper told him I'd filed with county, he went quiet in a particular way. What way? The way a man goes quiet when he realizes the position he's been standing on isn't as solid as he thought. She handed Nathan the basket. He also said something that's been bothering me since I drove away. What? He said the survey was filed with the territorial office in Tucson, not the county. She looked at him. How would he know exactly where it was filed unless he had already checked whether it was accessible? He's been to the territorial office in Tucson, Nathan. He looked for that survey. He knows what it says. Nathan was still. He knows the boundary line. He knows the accurate boundary line, she said, which means his offer letters to you were based on a line he knew was incorrect. That's not a negotiating error. That's deliberate misrepresentation of the property boundary for financial advantage. She held his gaze. That's fraud. Tom Briggs, who had drifted within earshot without quite intending to let out a low sound that was not quite a word. Nathan looked at Eleanor. Can you prove it? The Tucson territorial records will show whether he filed a records request. That's public information. If his request is dated before his first offer letter to you, we have proof he knew the correct boundary when he made an offer based on an incorrect one. She was already thinking ahead. I need to go to Tucson. That's 2 days. I know. You've been here 3 weeks. I know that too. She looked at him. Do you want to save this ranch or not? He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, I'll come with you. She shook her head. You need to be here. If Hargrove makes a move while we're both gone, Miguel needs someone with authority on the property. She paused. I'll take Eli. He's quick and he knows the road. Eli is 16. He's also extremely good with horses and completely loyal, she said. And Hargrove won't see him as a threat, which means we travel without attracting attention. She picked up her basket. I'll be ready at 4 tomorrow morning. Nathan put his hand on the wagon wheel, not stopping her, just a hand on the wheel, and she was aware of it the same way she was increasingly aware of the small, specific ways he occupied the space around her. Eleanor, he said. She stopped. Be careful, he said. It was the same words Ada had used. They landed completely differently. I will be, she said, and went inside. She left at 4 the next morning with Eli driving and the oilcloth document case in her lap and a list in her head of every record she needed to see at the territorial office in Tucson. Eli drove with the unconscious competence of someone who has been handling horses since before he could reliably spell his own name, and he was wise enough at 16 to understand that when Miss Brooks was quiet, she was thinking, and thinking should not be interrupted. They were 2 hours out from Red Creek when Eli said, Miss Brooks, there's a rider been keeping pace with us on the South Ridge. Eleanor did not look right away. She counted to 5. Then she looked. There was a rider on the South Ridge. Single horse keeping pace, hanging back enough to be coincidence. If coincidence was something she believed in, which right now it wasn't. Draper, she said. You know him. I know who sent him. She looked straight ahead. Maintain the pace, Eli. Don't speed up. Don't look at him again. He following us? He's watching where we're going, she said. There's a difference. He won't interfere on an open road. He's reporting back. She settled the document case more firmly in her lap. Which means Hargrove didn't know we were going to Tucson until 30 minutes ago. How'd he find out that fast? She thought about the ranch. The hands. Tom Briggs, who was loyal but young, and who talked when he was comfortable. She filed it away. Not Tom's fault he didn't know what was important to keep quiet. She'd been less careful than she should have been about what she said at the supper table. It doesn't matter how, she said. What matters is he knows now, which means we need to be at the Territorial Records Office before anyone gets there ahead of us. Eli, she said, how fast can these horses go? Eli grinned. It was the grin of a 16-year-old boy who has just been given permission to do the thing he wanted to do anyway. Considerably faster than this, ma'am. Then let's find out, she said. They reached Tucson by 2 in the afternoon, faster than the road should have allowed. Eli had a gift she would not have predicted for finding the smooth line through rough terrain, and the horses were good horses. Nathan's horses, and by the time they drove into Tucson, her back ached, and she didn't care even slightly. The Territorial Records Office was a low adobe building 2 streets off the main road, cooler inside than out, staffed by a thin clerk named Morrison, who had the professional suspicion of a man who has seen people try to access records for purposes they preferred not to explain. Eleanor explained herself precisely and truthfully, which she always did when precision and truth served her purpose. She was the bookkeeper for Silver Creek Ranch. She was investigating a property dispute. She needed to see the access log for the 1874 Carter Boundary Survey. Yes, she understood that was a specific request. Yes, she had her documentation. No, she did not need to sit down, thank you. Morrison looked at her documentation. He looked at her. He went to the back. Eli sat on a bench near the door and ate the biscuits she'd packed that morning with the uncomplicated appetite of a boy who has been driving hard for 10 hours and has not thought once about anything except horses and road. Morrison came back with a ledger. He set it on the counter. You'll need to sign for the review, he said. She signed. She opened the ledger. She found the Carter survey entry. She found the access log beneath it, which showed every individual or party who had requested review of that document. There were 2 entries. The first was Nathan's father, James Carter, in 1874. The second was Charles Whitmore Hargrove, March 3, 1882. March 3, 1882. 12 days before his first offer letter to Nathan. The letter in which he had proposed a transaction based on a boundary line that was 12 feet off the correct measurement. Eleanor looked at the date for a long time. She was aware of her own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, the way it went when she was in the presence of something that mattered. She asked Morrison for a certified copy of the access log page. She asked for it in writing on official territorial letterhead. She paid the fee without expression. She folded the certified copy into the oilcloth case next to the boundary survey and the Prentice correspondence and the timeline she had built over 3 weeks of careful work, and she felt the whole case click together the way a key clicks in a lock. Not dramatic, not loud, just the clean, small sound of something that now fits. Eli, she said, we need to find an attorney. He looked up from his 3rd biscuit. Now. She was already moving toward the door. A territorial attorney, not a county one. Someone with standing to file in the federal district court. I don't know any attorneys, Eli said, getting to his feet. I don't need you to know one, she said. I need you to ask 3 people on the main street which attorney in Tucson has the best reputation for land disputes. Whoever 2 out of 3 name, that's who we're seeing. Eli went. He was back in 7 minutes with the name Arthur Hale, 2 streets north, brass plate on the door. Arthur Hale was 60 years old, built like a man who had spent decades sitting over documents and had made his peace with that, with sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles, and the careful, unhurried manner of someone who charges by the hour and therefore sees no reason to rush. He received Eleanor in his office, looked at her with the assessment she was used to cataloging her youth, her gender, her clothing, her apparent reason for being in his office without a male representative, and had the good grace to rearrange his assumptions quickly when she set the documents on his desk. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Eleanor let him read. Eli sat in the corner and had quietly fallen asleep, which she did not begrudge him. Hale looked up. The access log entry is dated before the offer letter. Yes. And you have both the original certified copy of the survey and the county filing receipt. Yes. And the Prentice correspondence you've laid out here suggests the bank and Hargrove have been in communication throughout the period of the debt pressure. I believe so, though I don't yet have direct proof of the communication itself. The circumstantial evidence is strong, dates timing the property valuation language in the Prentice letters, but I'd want a subpoena on Prentice's records before I'd call it proven. Hale took off his spectacles, cleaned them, put them back on. It was the gesture of a man who is deciding something. Miss Brooks, what is it you're asking me to do? File an injunction against any boundary modification or water rights transfer involving Silver Creek Ranch pending a formal federal review. And begin building the fraud case. She paused. What I have here is enough to stop Hargrove from moving on the boundary until a federal surveyor can do an independent verification. That buys us time to subpoena Prentice's correspondence and establish the coordination. Hale looked at the documents again. Hargrove is a considerable power in this county. He is, she agreed. That's why we're filing in federal court rather than county. He looked at her for a moment. How old are you? Old enough to have found everything in that file, she said. He almost smiled. It was the close-mouthed almost smile of a man who has been pleasantly surprised and is not quite ready to admit it. My fee for an injunction filing is $30. Additional costs to be agreed in writing before they're incurred. Agreed, she said. Nathan Carter will be in Tucson within the week to formalize the representation agreement. I can leave you a deposit today. She reached into her traveling bag. She had brought $60 Nathan's money pressed on her before she left with the quiet practicality of a man who trusts someone's judgment enough not to ask what it will be used for. She put $30 on Hale's desk. Begin drafting immediately, she said. I need the injunction filed before the end of the week. Hale looked at the money, looked at her. Yes, ma'am, he said. They stayed the night in Tucson at a modest boarding house near the records office, and Eleanor lay on the narrow bed in the quiet dark, and did not feel the particular loneliness she had expected. She felt instead something she recognized after a moment as purpose. She had a plan. She had the documents. She had an attorney filing an injunction that would stop Hargrove in his tracks before he could maneuver further. She was 3 weeks from a train platform where she had been told she was not what anyone required, and she had just built the legal foundation to save a ranch from a fraud that had been running for 2 years. She thought about Nathan's hands flat on the table the first night, the way he'd said it started with the drought, in the voice of a man confessing something he'd been carrying alone. She thought about the cottonwood on the North Ridge where his father was buried. She thought about the way he'd said, I'm glad I picked up the trunk, quiet and direct with no performance in it. She was too careful to name what she was feeling. She went to sleep instead. They drove back to Red Creek the next day and arrived in late afternoon to find Nathan on the porch, with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not worried, she had seen him worried. Something more specific than that. Sharper. He came off the porch before the wagon stopped moving. Hargrove came to the ranch, he said. Eleanor set down the reins. When? Yesterday afternoon, 6 hours after you left. He looked at her steadily. He came with Draper and 2 men I didn't recognize, said he wanted to discuss a business proposition, said he was prepared to offer a settlement on the water dispute if I was willing to have a reasonable conversation without outside interference. A pause on the last 2 words that told her exactly what outside interference meant. I told him the ranch's legal matters were being handled, and he could speak to our attorney. He didn't know about Hale, Eleanor said. No, he did not. Nathan looked at her. He asked who. I said Tucson. He left. Eli had climbed down and was unhitching the horses with the quiet efficiency of a boy who senses the conversation is not for him. Eleanor climbed down, picked up the document case, and looked at Nathan. "The injunction is being filed this week," she said. "Once it's in the federal record, Hargrove can't move on the boundary without triggering a federal review. He'll know within a day or two." She paused. "That's when he'll try something else." "What else is there?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But men like Hargrove don't have only one plan. They build contingencies." She looked at him. "Did he say anything else? Anything that seemed odd or off the point?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "He said—" He stopped. Started again. "He mentioned the mail. Said the postal service out of Red Creek had been unreliable lately. Said sometimes documents go astray." Eleanor felt something cold move through her chest. "He was telling you he can interfere with correspondence." "Or warning me," Nathan said. "I'm not sure which. It's both," she said. "It's a warning that functions as interference. He's telling you he has reach you don't." She looked at the oilcloth case in her hand. "All the originals are here. Everything we've filed has certified copies with Hale in Tucson. He can't touch what's already in the federal record." She met Nathan's eyes. "He's running out of room." "Running out of room is when men like that get dangerous," Nathan said. He was right. She knew he was right. "Yes," she said. They looked at each other in the late afternoon light. There was a quality to the silence between them now that had not been there 3 weeks ago. Not the comfortable working silence she'd noticed earlier, but something with more in it, something that took up space. "You should have seen her in Tucson," Eli announced from the paddock, apparently feeling the conversation had been serious long enough. "She walked into that records office, and that Morrison fellow didn't know what was coming. She just—" He made a motion with his hand that communicated competence in the specific way teenage boys communicate things they don't have words for. Nathan looked at Eli, then at Eleanor. "Morrison give you trouble?" "He was professional," she said. "She signed for the review before he'd finished deciding whether to give it to her," Eli said. "Just signed and handed it back. He didn't even question it." "Eli," Eleanor said. "Yes, ma'am." He went back to the horses. Nathan was looking at her with that expression again, the one she still couldn't fully name. "You're going to win this," he said. Not like a question. "We're going to win this," she said. "I'm the one reading the documents. You're the one this land belongs to. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at the house. "Is Miguel inside? I need to brief him on what we found." "Kitchen," Nathan said. And then quietly as she walked past him toward the porch steps, "Eleanor." She stopped. Turned. He had his hat in his hand. He wasn't looking at the fence or the horizon or the barn. He was looking at her direct and steady with the same eyes that had looked at her across that platform 3 weeks ago, but carrying something more now, something that had built up across 22 days of lamplight and coffee and documents spread across a kitchen table. He stopped. He was not a man who fumbled for words, which made the fumbling more significant than any fluent thing he might have said. "I wanted to say, before any of this goes further, you didn't come here for this ranch. You came here because you had no other choice, and you've done what you've done in 3 weeks is—" He stopped again. Eleanor looked at him. "Mr. Carter?" "Nathan." "Nathan?" She said it for the first time without correcting herself. She watched something cross his face at that brief warm, quickly controlled. "What you did on that platform was not a small thing, regardless of what comes next." She held his gaze. "I haven't forgotten it." He nodded, slowly. "Neither have I," he said. The Harvest Festival was 4 weeks away. Hargrove had been publicly talking about attending for months. It was the social event of the Red Creek calendar, and a man of his position did not miss it. Eleanor had known since the second week that whatever public confrontation Hargrove intended would happen there in front of the whole town, because men like Hargrove understood the value of an audience just as well as they understood the value of a boundary line. She had 4 weeks to make sure that when that confrontation came, Silver Creek Ranch was standing on solid legal ground. She went inside to find Miguel. There was still work to do, but at the kitchen door, she paused for just a moment, not turning around, and she was aware of Nathan still standing in the yard behind her with his hat in his hand. And she was aware of what that meant, and she let herself be aware of it for exactly 3 seconds before she went inside and picked up her pen. 3 seconds. She allowed herself that. Then she got back to work. The injunction arrived in Red Creek on a Tuesday, carried by a federal courier who handed Nathan the official sealed document on the front porch of Silver Creek Ranch, while Draper watched from the road on his gray horse. Nathan signed for it, looked at Draper on the road. Draper turned his horse and rode back toward the Hargrove property without a word. Nathan brought the document inside and set it on the table in front of Eleanor, who was already reading it before he'd pulled his hand away. She went through it twice, checked the filing date, checked the court seal, checked Hale's signature on the accompanying letter, and set it down with both hands flat on the paper. "It's solid," she said. "Hargrove cannot initiate any boundary modification, water rights transfer, or property action affecting Silver Creek until the federal survey is complete. The review period is 90 days minimum." She looked up. "He has no legal path forward for 3 months." "Which means he'll find an illegal one," Nathan said. "Or a social one," she said. "The festival is in 11 days. Nathan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He'd been working since 4 that morning. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the particular tiredness that comes not from one long day, but from months of long days stacked behind each other. "Hargrove's been talking," he said. "Ada at the general store told Miguel yesterday. Hargrove's been telling people in town that I've brought in an outside woman to run my affairs because I can't manage my own ranch. That she's got some kind of hold over me." He said it flatly without embarrassment. "You should know what's being said." Eleanor looked at him. "What kind of hold?" He held her gaze. "The kind people say when they don't have anything factual to work with and want to damage something anyway." She absorbed that. It was not a surprise. She'd expected something like it since the day in the general store, but hearing it plainly still landed differently than anticipating it. "Is it bothering the hands?" Tom asked Miguel about it. Miguel told him if he had questions about Miss Brooks, he could take them up with Miss Brooks directly and see how that went for him. Nathan's mouth moved. Tom decided he didn't have questions. Eleanor put that away in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered but didn't require immediate action. "Hargrove needs the festival," she said. "He can't touch us legally right now, so he needs the public moment. He'll use it to try to separate the town's opinion from the legal record, get people convinced the whole thing is improper before the survey comes back and proves it isn't." She tapped the injunction. "We need to be there, both of us, together." Nathan looked at her steadily. "Together. It will settle the question of whether I have some mysterious hold over you," she said with a precision that was also, if he was listening carefully, something else. "If we're there as a working partnership, not hiding, not apologizing, there's nothing for him to make exotic. And if he confronts you directly, then I'll answer him directly." She met his eyes. "I've been answering men like Hargrove my entire life, Nathan. I'm not afraid of him." He was quiet for a moment. "I know you're not," he said. "That's not what worries me." She looked at him. "What worries you?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the injunction between them, at her hands still resting on either side of it, and then he looked at her face with the particular directness she had come to understand was his equivalent of saying something important. "You've been here 5 weeks," he said. "You've saved this ranch. You're going to win this legal case, and when it's done—" He stopped. "When it's done, you won't have a reason to stay." The kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor did not look away. "I have an employment agreement," she said carefully. "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." She moved her hands off the injunction, folded them in her lap. She was too careful to say the wrong thing here, too careful to say something she meant too much in a way that would make it easier for him to dismiss later if things went badly. "When the legal matter is resolved," she said slowly, "I would like to discuss the terms of a permanent arrangement, if that would be agreeable." He looked at her. "Permanent," he said. "I'm good at this work," she said. "The ranch needs someone who can do it, and I—" She stopped. She started again. "I find I don't want to leave." "Eleanor, the festival first," she said. "Hargrove first. Then we discuss permanent arrangements." She picked up her pen. "Do you agree?" He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face, complex, warm, carefully held. "Yes," he said. "I agree." She went back to her notes. He didn't move for another 3 seconds. Then he got up, got coffee, and came back to the table, and they worked side by side through the afternoon, in the particular comfortable quiet that had become the sound of Silver Creek Ranch operating the way it was supposed to. What neither of them knew was that Hargrove wasn't waiting for the festival. Miguel brought it to Eleanor 3 days before the event, coming to the kitchen door at 7 in the morning, with his hat in his hands and the look on his face she'd learned to identify as the look that meant something had gone wrong in a way he didn't fully understand yet. "Sam Hooper rode out this morning," Miguel said. "Asked to speak to Nathan. Nathan's on the north pasture, so I talked to him." "What did he say?" Miguel came inside, set his hat on the table, and sat down with the deliberate movement of a man organizing himself to say something he doesn't want to say. "Hargrove filed a complaint with the territorial governor's office 2 days ago, not about the boundary. About you." Eleanor went still. "About me. He's claiming you obtained access to the county records office under false pretenses, that you represented yourself as Nathan's legal wife without a valid marriage record, that the boundary filing should be invalidated because it was made by someone misrepresenting their authority to act on behalf of Silver Creek Ranch." The room was very quiet. Eleanor sat with that for exactly 5 seconds. She was aware of her own breathing, slow and deliberate. She was aware of the pen in her hand, which she set down carefully so that her hands would be still. "Is Hooper the one who filed the complaint?" she asked. "No. Hooper came to warn us. He said Hargrove's man brought him the complaint to co-sign and he refused. But the complaint's in the governor's office regardless." "On what grounds does he argue I misrepresented my authority?" "He says you told Hooper you were acting on behalf of Silver Creek Ranch. His claim is that you have no legal standing to do so because your relationship with Nathan isn't a legal marriage." Eleanor was quiet. She looked at the table. She looked at Miguel's hat sitting on the table between them. "He's right," she said. Miguel looked at her. "Miss Brooks, about the technical point, he's right," she said carefully. "I am not Nathan's legal wife. I presented myself to Hooper as the ranch's bookkeeper, acting with Nathan's authorization, which is true, and Nathan's written authorization is in my records. But if Hargrove has found an attorney willing to argue that an unauthorized agent's filing is invalid—" She stopped. "How long before the governor's office responds?" "Hooper thinks 2 weeks, maybe less." She did the arithmetic. The festival was in 3 days. The governor's response in 2 weeks. The federal survey review in 90 days. "If the governor's office sustains the complaint," she said, "the boundary filing gets invalidated. The injunction may hold on its own merits, but it weakens the overall case." She looked at Miguel. "Is Hooper still here?" "Waiting outside." "Ask him to come in." Sam Hooper came in with the careful, slightly guilty manner of a man who has done the right thing and isn't completely sure it was the smart thing. He sat across from Eleanor and turned his hat in his hands and said, "I want you to know I didn't sign it. Draper came to my office and put it on my counter, and I told him I wouldn't put my name to it." "Thank you, Mr. Hooper," Eleanor said. "That was right of you. Now, when you logged the boundary filing, what name did you record as the filing party?" He thought. "Silver Creek Ranch, Nathan Carter, property holder. Eleanor Brooks, authorized representative. You have that in your log?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Nathan's written authorization, you saw it when I filed?" "I did." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hooper, is there any procedural reason why a written authorized representative cannot make a county filing on behalf of a property holder?" He thought about it honestly. "No, ma'am. Long as the authorization's in writing and the property holder's on record." I've had attorneys make filings for clients. Ranchers send their foremen. Long as the authority is documented. He paused. Hargrove's attorney knows that. The complaint he filed isn't about the authorization. It's about whether you misrepresented your relationship to Nathan. Did I state to you that I was Nathan's wife? No, ma'am. You said you were the ranch's bookkeeper acting on his behalf. Then the representation is accurate, and the complaint fails, she said. The question of my personal relationship to Nathan is irrelevant to the validity of the filing. Hooper nodded slowly. That's what I'd say too. But Hargrove's got a Tucson attorney, and the governor's office pays attention to Tucson attorneys. Eleanor picked up her pen. Mr. Hooper, would you be willing to provide a written statement confirming how I represented myself when I made the filing? Specifically, that I did not claim to be Nathan's wife, and that I presented valid written authorization from the property holder. I'll write it right now if you've got paper, he said. She had paper. He wrote it. She read it, asked him to add 2 specific clarifying lines, and he added them without objection. She thanked him, saw him out, and came back to the kitchen where Miguel was waiting with the patience of a man who has seen enough in his life to know that useful things take the time they take. We're all right, she said. The complaint will fail, but Hargrove knew it would fail when he filed it. Miguel looked at her. Then why file it? Because it doesn't need to succeed, she said. It needs to create noise, uncertainty. It needs to make Nathan's neighbors wonder whether the ranch's legal position is solid. It needs to do exactly what it's done: bring Hooper out here, disrupt our week, put doubt in the air before the festival. She set Hooper's statement neatly with the other documents. He's not fighting us legally anymore. He's fighting us publicly. She found Nathan at noon and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him she had come to depend on without quite realizing she'd started depending on it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He filed a complaint calling your standing into question because you're not legally my wife." Yes. And the solution to that particular argument is Hooper's statement, which establishes that my standing was based on written authorization, not on my personal status. She looked at him. That's the legal solution. And the other kind of solution? He asked. She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression again, the direct one, the one that didn't perform anything, and she felt very clearly what he was asking, and felt equally clearly that she was not going to answer it carelessly. "Nathan," she said, "ask me properly." He looked at her for a long moment. He took a breath. "Eleanor," he said, "I have been trying to find the right moment to say this for 2 weeks, and I have determined that there is no right moment, there is only the moment you're in." He held her gaze. "I want you to stay. Not as a bookkeeper, not as an arrangement. I want you to stay because this ranch has felt like a home again for the first time in 3 years, and that is because of you, and I am asking you to marry me." She looked at him. She had imagined this. She was honest enough with herself to admit she had imagined it, but imagining something and standing in the actual moment of it are completely different experiences, and the actual moment was quieter and more solid and more frightening than anything she had imagined. "Is this," she said carefully, "because of the complaint?" "No," he said. "The complaint just ran out my patience for waiting for the right moment." He held her gaze. "The reason is you. All of it is you." She was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably only a few seconds. "Yes," she said. He stared at her. "Yes, yes, Nathan, I'll marry you." She looked at him with the same steadiness she brought to everything. "After the festival, after Hargrove. I want this settled legally before we do anything else because I will not have him claiming our marriage was a tactical move." Nathan blinked. Then he said, "You just agreed to marry me, and your first concern is the legal optics." "It's an important concern," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he laughed, a real laugh, not the controlled almost laugh she'd seen before, but something full and genuine that she hadn't heard from him yet, and that landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. "All right," he said, Festival first. Hargrove first. Then we do this properly. Agreed, she said, and went back to work. The festival arrived on a Saturday, golden and warm, the whole of Red Creek turning out the way small towns turn out for their annual occasion. Children racing between the stalls, women in their good dresses, men who had not spoken to each other all year, finding reasons to be cordial over cider and meat pies. The dance pavilion was strung with lanterns that moved in the evening breeze. The smell of wood smoke and frying dough was everywhere. Eleanor had dressed carefully. Not to impress, she was not in the business of dressing to impress, but to be unassailable. Her best blue dress, the one she'd had made in Philadelphia 2 years ago for a position interview that had led nowhere, pressed and neat. Her hair pinned simply. She walked into the festival grounds beside Nathan, and she was aware of the way people looked at them. The quick glances, the leaning toward neighbors, the small adjustments people make when something they've been discussing arrives in person. Ada from the general store caught her eye immediately and gave her a nod that communicated several things at once. Welcome. Be careful. I'm watching. Eleanor nodded back. Miguel was there with 2 of the hands. He positioned himself without being asked in a way that was not quite bodyguard, and was not quite coincidence, close enough to be present, far enough to be social. He'd done it instinctively. Eleanor noticed and said nothing. Hargrove arrived an hour into the festival. He came with Draper and 2 other men, and a woman Eleanor hadn't seen before. Well-dressed, composed, who moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who has attended a great many public events in a supporting capacity. Eleanor watched him from across the grounds as he worked the crowd, shaking hands, bending his head to listen to people's small concerns, performing the role of the concerned local dignitary, with the fluency of long practice. He was good at it. She would give him that. Tom Briggs materialized at Eleanor's shoulder. He's been here 20 minutes, and he's talked to the county commissioner, the magistrate, and Reverend Harris, Tom said quietly with the precision of someone who had been watching. Tom Briggs, she had learned, paid attention when he thought it mattered. It was one of his better qualities. In that order. The commissioner, the magistrate, and the reverend, Eleanor repeated. He's building witnesses, not votes. He wants credible people in the room when whatever he's planning happens. She looked at Tom. Stay near Miguel. Yes, ma'am. Hargrove found her 40 minutes later. She was talking to Ada and 2 other women. A conversation about the new postal route that was entirely genuine and entirely pleasant when she heard him approaching. Not from any particular sound, but from the way the people around her went slightly careful, the way crowds go careful when something with authority moves through them. Mrs. Carter, Hargrove said. She turned. He had used the name deliberately. Not Miss Brooks, not Eleanor, but the title that was most contested, the one that cut directly to the question he'd been publicly raising for a week. Ada went still beside her. The 2 women took a small step back. Mr. Hargrove, she said pleasantly. Are you enjoying the festival? I am, he said. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the general store, assessing, revising, not quite able to resolve her into the category he'd prepared. I wonder if I might have a word with Nathan. Nathan is speaking with the Hendersons, she said. I'd be happy to take a message. Hargrove smiled. It was the smile of a man who is about to say something he has prepared. Actually, I wanted to address something publicly, since a number of people here have been following the situation with interest. He spoke at a volume that was exactly calculated, not quite loud enough to be a speech, loud enough for the people nearby to hear clearly. Several heads turned. I've had some concerns about the legal matters being conducted in Silver Creek Ranch's name. I think the community deserves to know that there are questions about whether those matters have been properly authorized. There are no valid questions about that, Eleanor said. Her voice was even. The authorization is documented. The county records clerk confirmed it in writing 3 days ago. Hooper, Hargrove said, with a small dismissive movement, has been considerably influenced in his perspective. His perspective is a sworn written statement, Eleanor said, which is a different thing from influence. The complaint with the governor's office, "Will fail," she said, "because my representation to Mr. Hooper was accurate. I did not claim a personal status I don't hold. I presented written authorization from the property holder, which is the only standing required." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Hargrove, you filed that complaint knowing it would fail. You filed it because you needed something to talk about at this festival. I understand that. The injunction leaves you without a legal move, so you're making a social one." She paused. "I'd encourage you to make it clearly so people here can evaluate it clearly." The crowd around them had grown. She was aware of it, the widening circle of people pretending not to listen while listening extremely carefully. She was aware of Ada slightly straightening beside her. She was aware of Reverend Harris 3 feet to Hargrove's left, which was where Hargrove had wanted a credible witness, and had positioned one, except that the Reverend was now hearing things Hargrove had not quite planned for him to hear this directly. Hargrove's smile thinned. "The question of your standing in this county." "My standing in this county is the same as any person's who lives here and works honestly," she said. "You rejected me at a train depot 7 weeks ago. That was your right. What I do with my life since then is not your concern." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when something true has been said in public without any decoration around it. Hargrove looked at the crowd. He could feel it. She could see him feeling it. The shift, the slight movement of sympathy that goes through people when they hear plainness after a long time of listening to something more elaborate. He had not expected her to name the depot. He had expected what men like him always expected, that shame would keep the inconvenient facts out of the public conversation. He said, "You came here with nothing. I came here with my education, my honesty, and my willingness to work," she said. "Every legal filing that stands in the county records today is based on documents that existed before I arrived. I found them. I organized them. I presented them accurately. If the case for Silver Creek Ranch is stronger than you expected, Mr. Hargrove, it is because someone finally read the paperwork." She was almost certain she heard a sound from somewhere in the crowd that was a suppressed laugh. Hargrove took a step forward. "Miss Brooks." The title change was deliberate, a retreat from the Mrs. Carter he'd opened with a public demotion. "You are an intelligent woman, I'll grant that, but you have inserted yourself into a situation you don't fully understand, and when Nathan Carter loses this ranch, and he will lose it because the bank debt is real, regardless of boundary lines, you will be left with nothing again." She looked at him. "And you believe that frightens me," she said, "because I came here with nothing once already. Doesn't it?" "No," she said. "It teaches me I can start again. You've never had to start from nothing, Mr. Hargrove. That's your disadvantage, not mine." Nathan appeared at her shoulder. She hadn't seen him coming. She'd been focused entirely on Hargrove, but he was there standing beside her with his hat in his hand, and the same quiet level expression he'd had on the platform the day he picked up her trunk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step in front of her. He stood beside her, which was exactly the right thing, and she felt it register in the crowd around them, the same way she felt it register somewhere in herself. "Charles," Nathan said, "I think you've said what you came to say." Hargrove looked at Nathan, looked at Eleanor, looked at the crowd, which had now expanded to include the county commissioner, the magistrate Reverend Harris, Ada Tom Briggs, and approximately 40 other residents of Red Creek, who were watching with the focused attention of people who know they are witnessing something that will be discussed for years. "This isn't finished," Hargrove said. "It will be," Nathan said, "when the federal survey comes back." He held Hargrove's gaze with a steadiness that didn't waver. "You've known the correct boundary line since March of 1882. The Territorial Records Office in Tucson has a log entry with your name on it dated 12 days before your first offer letter to me. Offer letter with the wrong boundary figure." He paused. "That's fraud, Charles. We both know it. The federal court will know it in 90 days. Another pause. "You should talk to your attorney." Hargrove stared at him. The composed, polished expression he'd been wearing cracked not completely, not publicly, but enough. A fracture in the surface. He'd known Nathan had the survey document, had known about the boundary finding, but he had not known they had the Tucson access log. She could see the precise moment he understood that they had it. Draper put his hand on Hargrove's arm. Hargrove didn't move for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back. He turned. He walked away through the crowd that parted around him, and Draper followed, and the 2 men Eleanor didn't know followed, and the composed woman last. The crowd watched him go. Then slowly, the crowd turned back, and Eleanor became aware that the county commissioner, a broad man named Fuller, she had not met before, was standing 2 feet away with an expression on his face that was not the expression of a man who had just watched a powerful local figure perform successfully. Fuller looked at Nathan. "Carter," he said, "I'd like to sit down with you and your—" He glanced at Eleanor. "Your representative. This week if possible. I've been hearing things about the Prentice Bank situation that concern me, and I think the county may have an interest in what you've found." Nathan looked at Eleanor. She gave him the single small nod she'd developed for moments when what she was actually communicating was, "Yes, and I'll explain later, and this is important." "Thursday," Nathan said to Fuller. "Silver Creek Ranch. We'll have the documents ready." Fuller nodded, moved away. Tom Briggs appeared from the crowd and stood beside Miguel, and both of them had the look of men who have watched something they will tell their children about one day. Eli was somewhere in the crowd, and Eleanor heard him say something to another young man that she didn't quite catch. But the other young man's reaction suggested it was something along the lines of, "I told you she was something." She became aware that Nathan was still standing beside her, close enough that their arms were nearly touching, and that he was looking at her with something on his face that he was not attempting to conceal. "You told the crowd about the depot," he said quietly. "It was relevant," she said. "You named it in front of everyone." "I named it precisely so he couldn't use it," she said. "A thing that's been said plainly has no power as a whisper." She looked at him. "Are you bothered by that?" "No," he said. He stopped. "You just stood in the middle of a festival in front of half this county and told Charles Hargrove that what you came here with was enough, that you weren't frightened of starting over." He paused. "Did you mean it?" "Every word," she said. He looked at her. The lanterns above the pavilion were beginning to matter now as the light went down, throwing warm gold across the grounds, across the crowd, across the space between them that had been shrinking for 7 weeks. "I believe you," he said. "I believed you the first night with the bank letters. I believe you now." "Good," she said. They stood in the middle of the Red Creek Harvest Festival, while the crowd moved around them and the music from the pavilion started up, and Ada from the general store found Eleanor's eye across 20 feet of people and gave her a look of absolute and uncomplicated triumph. And Eleanor let herself have one moment, just one, where she felt the full weight of how far she had come from that platform and let it be what it was. Then she turned to Nathan and said, "Thursday with Fuller. I'll need to prepare the Prentice correspondence and the access log. Can you have Miguel pull the cattle valuation records? Fuller will want to see the full financial picture." "Eleanor," Nathan said. "Yes." "The music is playing," he said. She looked at the pavilion. She looked at him. She had not danced since Philadelphia, since before everything fell apart, since before she was someone who did the practical thing and set aside the things that weren't practical. "I suppose," she said, "the Prentice correspondence can wait until morning." He offered his hand. She took it, and they walked toward the pavilion together, and the lantern light was warm, and the music was good, and for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor Brooks did not think about documents or boundary lines or the next problem on the list. She just danced. The meeting with Commissioner Fuller on Thursday changed everything, and not in the way Eleanor had expected. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, methodically, thoroughly, with every document in order, and every argument mapped out before she walked through the door. The Prentice correspondence, the access log from Tucson, the timeline she'd built over 7 weeks, showing the coordination between the bank and Hargrove, the boundary survey with Hale's injunction attached. She had it all organized in the oilcloth case, tabbed and annotated, ready to present to a county commissioner who had expressed interest and might, if she presented it well, become an ally. What she had not prepared for was Fuller opening the meeting by setting his own document on the table. "Before we begin," Fuller said, "I want you to see this." It was a letter, written on Prentice Bank letterhead dated 4 months ago, addressed to the territorial governor's office. Eleanor read it once, then read it again with the slow, deliberate attention she gave to things that were trying to be something other than what they were. She looked up at Fuller. Prentice was petitioning the governor's office to have Silver Creek Ranch declared a distressed property eligible for accelerated debt collection. Yes, Fuller said, before any default had been formally established. Yes. And countersigned by... She looked at the bottom of the letter. Her voice stayed level. Countersigned by Hargrove as a supporting creditor. Hargrove holds a secondary note on the ranch, Fuller said. Did you know that, Eleanor looked at Nathan. Nathan's face had gone very still. No, he said quietly. I did not know that. Fuller leaned forward. Silas Crane, the private note holder your father borrowed from in 1882, sold that note 8 months ago, to Charles Hargrove. Hargrove has been holding a financial claim against Silver Creek Ranch while simultaneously running the boundary dispute. He paused. He is both your creditor and your neighbor. He has a legal interest in the property defaulting. The room was quiet. Eleanor set the letter down. She pressed it flat with her palm. She was aware of her own heartbeat slow and deliberate, and of Nathan sitting very still beside her, and of the specific shape this had just taken the shape of something larger and more coordinated than even she had mapped. He bought Crane's note, she said. He's been holding it for 8 months. Yes. While sending offer letters for the boundary parcel. Yes. If Nathan defaulted on the banknote and couldn't pay Hargrove's secondary note, Hargrove could pursue the property through 2 simultaneous legal channels. She looked at Fuller. He didn't need to win the boundary dispute. He needed Nathan under enough financial pressure that the boundary dispute became the easier path to settlement. Sign over the north parcel, Hargrove releases the secondary note pressure, and the bank debt becomes manageable. Nathan never knew he was negotiating with his own creditor. Fuller nodded. That's how I read it. Nathan said very quietly. He bought Crane's note while my father was dying. Nobody said anything to that. It didn't need response. It sat in the room, and everyone in the room let it sit. Eleanor picked up her pen. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, what this changed legally, what Hale needed to know what Fuller's interest in this meant for their position. She looked at Fuller directly. Why are you bringing this to us? Fuller was quiet for a moment. Because I have been taking Charles Hargrove's hospitality at his ranch twice a year for 15 years, he said. And because I have been making it easy for him to operate in this county without sufficient scrutiny. And because what I am reading in your documents and in that letter is not a neighbor with a legitimate dispute. It is a systematic effort to dispossess a man of land his family built. He looked at Nathan. Your father was a decent man. I owed him better than this. Nathan looked at Fuller for a long moment. What does the county need from us? I need your authorization to open a formal county investigation into the Hargrove-Prentice coordination, Fuller said. Separately from your federal case. 2 tracks, same evidence. It's harder for one set of attorneys to manage 2 simultaneous proceedings. Eleanor looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at her. You have it, Nathan said. She got back to Silver Creek that afternoon and went straight to the writing table and wrote to Hale in Tucson with the new information before she'd taken off her traveling coat. She wrote 3 pages clear and detailed and gave the letter to Eli to ride to Tucson that evening rather than wait for the morning postal run because she did not trust the postal run and she was not prepared to lose another day. Miguel was waiting in the kitchen when she came back in. He had the look of a man who has been waiting patiently for the right moment and has decided this is it. We need to talk about James Whitfield, he said. She sat down. Tell me. Tom heard something in town this morning. Whitfield, Nathan's old attorney, the one who moved to Santa Fe, he's back. Rode in 2 days ago, staying at the boarding house. Eleanor was very still. He's back. Tom saw him talking to Draper yesterday evening. She thought about it. Whitfield, who had represented Silver Creek Ranch for years, who had dealings with both Prentice's predecessor and the Hargrove family, who had moved to Santa Fe 6 months after Nathan's father died, and the financial pressure on the ranch started escalating. The man she had listed in her notes 8 weeks ago as the probable link between Prentice and Hargrove, with the annotation speculation, not proof. He came back for the hearing, she said. What hearing? The one Hargrove's attorney is going to request once he learns about Fuller's investigation. Whitfield knows where things are going, and he's deciding which side to be on when it gets there. She looked at Miguel. We need to talk to him before Hargrove does. Miguel raised his eyebrows. You want to approach Whitfield? I want to talk to him, she said. Not threaten, not pressure. Talk. He's a lawyer who helped build a fraudulent scheme and is now watching it unravel with 2 separate legal proceedings. His options are limited and getting more limited. The question is whether he understands that yet. Miguel looked at her for a long moment. You know what you're doing, he said. It was not a question. I know what the documents say, she said. The rest I'm working out as I go. She found Whitfield at the Red Creek boarding house the next morning at 8 o'clock. He was a thin man, 60-ish, with the careful, slightly anxious manner of someone who has been making small accommodations to people with power for so long that the accommodations have become structural, built into the way he held himself, the way he looked at people, the way he took up only the minimum necessary amount of space in any room. He looked at Eleanor when she sat across from him and said, You're the Carter woman, with a resigned quality that told her he had been expecting this conversation, even if he hadn't known exactly what shape it would take. Eleanor Brooks, she said. I've been managing Silver Creek Ranch's legal affairs for the past 7 weeks. I know who you are, he said. I know what you filed in Tucson. Then you know where this is going, she said. He looked at his coffee. What do you want from me? Information, she said. And I think you want to give it because you came back here and you didn't go to Hargrove first. He was quiet for a moment. How do you know I didn't go to Hargrove first? Because Draper would have been at Silver Creek by yesterday morning if Hargrove knew you were back and had spoken to you. She held his gaze. You talked to Draper on the street, not at the Hargrove Ranch. That was visibility management. You wanted to be seen talking to Draper, acknowledging you're here, that you know the players without actually committing. She paused. Mr. Whitfield, I have the Tucson access log. I have the Prentice correspondence. I have the timeline showing coordination between a bank officer and a neighbor creditor running a coordinated dispossession scheme. Commissioner Fuller has opened a county investigation. Arthur Hale is filing in federal court. She let that settle. You introduced Prentice and Hargrove. That's in your correspondence with both parties. The letters exist. Whitfield looked at her. His face had the exhausted quality of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is computing the cost of setting it down. I didn't know what they were planning, he said. When I introduced them, Prentice had been looking for investment opportunities in the territory, and Hargrove had capital to deploy. It was a financial introduction. I didn't. He stopped. When did you realize? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. When the drought ended, he said finally. When the creek came back and Hargrove dammed the South Branch 2 weeks later. I understood then what the plan was. I moved to Santa Fe because I didn't want to be present for it. But you didn't warn Nathan. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Eleanor looked at him. She had no particular desire to punish this man. He was not the architect of what had been done to Silver Creek Ranch. He was a smaller piece, a facilitator, a man who had looked away when looking away was easier. She had met men like this her whole life. They were not villains. They were just insufficient. Mr. Whitfield, she said, what I need from you is a written statement. The details of the introduction. The dates. The conversation in which the drought was discussed in the context of the Carter land. She paused. I also need to know whether Prentice or Hargrove ever discussed the secondary note on the ranch in your presence. He looked at his coffee again. Hargrove told me he'd acquired Crane's note, he said, last year. He told me as a matter of, I think he wanted me to know how complete his position was. Did he say anything else? Whitfield looked at her directly for the first time. He said Nathan Carter wouldn't know what hit him until the land was already gone. The room was very still. Eleanor picked up her pen. "Write that down," she said. "All of it. Today. I'll wait." It took an hour. Whitfield wrote, slowly stopping several times to rephrase, crossing things out, and rewriting with the care of a man who knows that what he is putting on paper will outlast him and wants it to be accurate. Eleanor did not hurry him. She sat across the table and let him write, and thought about Nathan's father, in 1882, sick with fever, unaware that the man sitting across his kitchen table was already arranging the pieces that would be used to take the land his father had built. When Whitfield finished, she read every word. She asked him to add 2 clarifications. He added them. She had him sign and date it, and she put it in the oilcloth case next to everything else, and she thought that the case was getting heavy in a very satisfying way. She was halfway back to Silver Creek when she realized she was crying. Not dramatically. She never cried dramatically. Just a few tears, quiet and private, that she let happen on the road with no one watching. She was crying for Nathan's father, she thought, who had shaken hands with Hargrove's father in good faith for 30 years, and died not knowing what his neighbor's son was planning. She was crying for Nathan, who had spent 3 years trying to hold a ranch together against a tide that had been artificially created. She was crying a little for herself, for the woman who had read a note on a train platform in the heat, and not cried then, because there was an audience and had apparently saved it for a road outside Red Creek 7 weeks later, when the worst of it was finally going to be answered. She let it happen. Then she straightened, dried her face, and drove the rest of the way home. She told Nathan that evening, all of it. Whitfield's statement, what he'd said about Hargrove's words. Nathan Carter won't know what hit him until the land is already gone. She told him plainly, and watched his face move through the information, the way she'd watched it move through things before, the careful private processing of a man who feels things deeply and shows them slowly. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "He said that," Nathan said. "Those words." "Yes." "While my father was alive." "Yes." He put both hands flat on the table. She recognized the gesture. It was the same one from the first night, the night she'd asked him for the true version. Something he did when he was holding himself very still. "We have enough to stop him," she said quietly. The federal case, the county investigation, Whitfield's statement, the access log. "We have enough to stop him completely, and to expose the coordination to the territorial court. Hargrove is going to lose everything he schemed for, and the legal record is going to show exactly why." She looked at him. "Your father's ranch is safe, Nathan." He looked at her. His eyes were bright in a way she pretended not to notice, because she understood about the specific privacy of feeling something that big in front of someone else. "Because of you," he said. "Because the documents existed," she said. "Because your father kept records. Because the truth was there to be found." "Eleanor." His voice was quiet and direct. "Because of you." She held his gaze. "All right," she said. "Because of both of us." He reached across this table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatic, not performed. Just his hand over hers, warm and steady, and entirely deliberate. And she turned her hand over and held on, and they sat like that in the kitchen of Silver Creek Ranch in the lamplight, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The federal survey came back in 63 days, faster than the 90-day window, because Fuller's county investigation had elevated the urgency. The survey confirmed the 1874 boundary exactly. The south boundary of the north parcel ran precisely where Eleanor had said it ran, 12 feet south of the line Hargrove had been using. Hale filed the fraud case in federal district court 2 weeks after the survey results arrived. The case named Hargrove and Prentice, both citing the access log, the offer letters, the coordinated debt pressure, and Whitfield's signed statement. Prentice's attorneys responded within a week, not contesting the charges, but opening negotiation on a settlement, which was the response of a man who has calculated his odds and does not like what he found. Hargrove contested. He hired 2 attorneys, and he contested loudly, and with the full force of a man who has been the most powerful person in a county for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to face something he can't outspend. The territorial court granted Fuller's county investigation full subpoena power in October. The subpoena on Hargrove's financial records arrived at his ranch on a Monday morning while he was in the middle of breakfast, according to Draper, who told Tom Briggs, who told Miguel, who told Eleanor, without being able to entirely keep the satisfaction out of his voice. She kept the satisfaction out of her own voice. She was careful that way, but she felt it. Nathan and Eleanor married in November in the small wooden church at the center of Red Creek on a cold, bright Saturday morning, with the whole county watching. Not from obligation, because it was Red Creek, and everyone attended everything, but because these were two people the town had watched find each other across 7 weeks of visible struggle, and the community had developed what Ada from the general store described as a considerable personal investment in how it turned out. Eleanor wore the blue dress she'd had made in Philadelphia for the interview that had led nowhere. She wore it now to a place that was hers, not borrowed, not provisional, not contingent on anyone else's assessment of her worth. She walked into that church on her own because she had no father to walk beside her, and she was not going to pretend she needed one. And she walked to where Nathan stood at the front with Miguel beside him and Eli in the first pew, looking like a boy who has been told to sit still and is managing it with effort. Nathan looked at her coming down the aisle, the way he had looked at her on the depot platform and on the wagon road, and across the lamp on the kitchen table and at the festival, with that direct, steady attention that never performed and never diminished. Except now, there was nothing held back in it. Whatever he had been keeping careful before was not being kept careful anymore. He was just looking at her, and she was just walking toward him, and when she reached him, he took her hand with the same firm, entirely certain grip he'd offered at the wagon, and had never entirely withdrawn. Reverend Harris kept the ceremony short, which Eleanor had specifically requested. At the end of it, when the thing was done, and the church was full of the particular warm noise of people who are genuinely pleased about something, Ada from the general store pushed her way to the front, and took Eleanor's face in both hands and said, "I knew it the day you stood up to him in my store." And Eleanor laughed a real laugh, not the careful, almost laugh she'd developed as protective coloring, and let herself be held for a moment by a woman who had been quietly watching out for her since the day she arrived. Commissioner Fuller shook Nathan's hand with both of his. "Your father would be proud," he said. Nathan said, "Yes, sir, I believe he would." The Hargrove case settled in January. Not a full capitulation. Hargrove's attorneys were skilled enough to negotiate the shape of it, but a settlement that included the release of the secondary note on Silver Creek Ranch, a formal retraction of the boundary claim, a payment to Nathan for damages related to the water rights interference, and a permanent restriction on any Hargrove property action within 5 miles of Silver Creek's boundaries. The territorial court's record showed the fraud finding clearly. It would be there in the public record as long as the court stood. Prentice settled separately, restructuring Nathan's bank debt at corrected terms with a reduced interest rate and an extended repayment schedule that made the debt manageable for the first time in 3 years. Silas Crane's original note, now released by Hargrove as part of the settlement, was void. Eleanor made sure it was formally voided and filed in the county records with a notation. She was thorough that way. She did not leave loose ends. By spring, Silver Creek Ranch was not just surviving, it was building. Eleanor reorganized the accounts from the ground up, converting Nathan's rough record-keeping into a clean double-entry ledger system that let them see for the first time exactly where money came from and where it went and what was possible. She planted the kitchen garden in March, and it came in strong in May. She organized a correspondence school for the children of 3 neighboring ranches whose families couldn't reach Red Creek for schooling in winter. Nothing formal, just lessons by mail and a 3-hour session at Silver Creek twice a month. But it grew faster than she'd expected, and by summer there were 9 children attending. Miguel, who had maintained this ranch through 3 years of crisis on stubbornness and loyalty alone, got a proper wage increase in February. That was Eleanor's first act after the settlement funds arrived. He said, "You didn't need to do this right away." And she said, "Yes, I did." And that was the end of that conversation. Tom Briggs became a foreman. He had earned it 6 times over by the time Eleanor formally recommended it to Nathan, but she wanted to see a full year of his judgment before she put her name to it. When she did, Tom took his hat off, as he always did when he came inside now, and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," correcting himself with the slight self-consciousness he still had about the change, and Eleanor said, "Either one is fine, Tom." And he nodded and went back to work. Eli turned 17 in March and announced that he wanted to study engineering, and could Miss Eleanor help him write an application to the Territorial College in Tucson. She helped him write the application. She also wrote a supplementary letter under her own name, outlining with specific examples what she had observed of his spatial reasoning, his instinct for mechanical systems, and his performance under pressure on the road to Tucson the previous fall. He was accepted. She was not surprised. Nathan drove him to the stage in June, and came back looking like a man who has sent a younger brother off to somewhere important, and is trying to decide how he feels about it. "He'll come back summers," Eleanor said. "I know," Nathan said. "He'll probably try to mechanize something on the ranch." Nathan looked at her. "Is that probably a good thing?" she said. He almost laughed. "You could have led with that." Arthur Hale retired in the fall of the following year and sent Eleanor a letter which she thought was unusual until she opened it and found that he was recommending her to his replacement as a first-rate legal researcher and correspondent, and that he had taken the liberty of mentioning her name to 2 other territorial attorneys who handled land disputes. The letter was formal and professional, and at the very bottom below his signature, he had added in handwriting rather than type, "You should have been admitted to the bar. It is the law's loss and Silver Creek's gain." She kept the letter in the oilcloth case, which she still had worn now and dark at the corners from use. Sam Hooper retired from the county records office in the spring, and the new clerk was a young woman named Ruth, who came to Eleanor in her first week to ask about proper filing procedure for boundary verification. Eleanor spent 2 hours with her, showed her every relevant document type, and answered every question completely. Ruth came back 2 more times that month with follow-up questions, and Eleanor answered those too, and by the end of the summer, Ruth was running the county records office with the competence and confidence of someone who has been given the tools they needed and trusted to use them. "You like that," Nathan said one evening watching Eleanor come home from another afternoon in town. "Like what?" "Teaching them," he said. "The women, Ruth, the children." She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "I like watching people become capable of things they didn't know they could do." He smiled. Not the almost smile, the full one, the one she'd first seen the morning after the festival and had not gotten entirely used to even now. "That's what you did here," he said. She looked at him. "We did it here," she said. He reached over and took her hand. "Yes," he said. "We did." Their first child was born on a Wednesday morning in the following October, early and decisive, which Eleanor thought was entirely appropriate. A girl with dark hair like her father, and according to Ada, who was present and had opinions about such things, the expression of someone who has arrived and fully intends to make herself at home. They named her Margaret after Eleanor's mother and James as a middle name for Nathan's father, the man who had planted a cottonwood on a north ridge in Arizona Territory, and never lived to see what grew around it. Eleanor was in the kitchen 4 days after Margaret's birth feeding her daughter and reviewing the September accounts when Nathan came in and stopped in the doorway with the expression she had learned meant he was about to say something he had been thinking about for a while. "You're reviewing accounts," he said. "The September figures are in." 4 days after? "I'm sitting down," she said. "I'm perfectly fine." She looked up. "What is it?" He came in and sat across from her, which was where he always sat. The lamp was between them, as it always was. "I drove past the depot yesterday," he said, "on the way back from Tucson." She looked at him. "Harold was there. The station master." He paused. "He asked after you." "He did. He said—" Nathan stopped. His voice had something in it she recognized as emotion held carefully. "He said he still thinks about that afternoon. Said he should have done something. Said he was ashamed that he didn't." Eleanor was quiet. She looked at her daughter, small and warm, and entirely unconcerned with the question of what had and hadn't happened on a train platform 18 months ago. "Did you tell him it was all right?" she asked. "I told him a man named Nathan Carter handled it," Nathan said. He laughed. She looked at him. "You told him a man named Nathan Carter handled it, as if you were talking about someone else." "I was embarrassed," he said simply. It was a big thing to say out loud. She shook her head slowly. It was the right thing, at the right moment, by the only person in that town who moved. He looked at her across the lamp, the way he had looked at her on the very first night across this same table, this same light. "I looked at you on that platform," he said, "and I saw someone being failed by everyone around her, including me until that moment." "You weren't failing me until that moment," she said. "You didn't know me until that moment." "No?" he said. "But you were there to be known." He was quiet. "I've thought about it a lot. What would have happened if I'd walked the other way? If I'd gotten my feed supplies and driven home and not been on that platform at the right time?" "You were there," she said. "I was there," he agreed. "And you didn't fall apart. You didn't throw yourself on my mercy. You negotiated conditions and asked for the bank letter the same night and went to Tucson on 48 hours' notice with a 16-year-old boy and came back with the document that saved everything." He looked at her. "I picked up a trunk. You did the rest." She held his gaze. "You gave me room to do the rest," she said. "That's not nothing. That's everything." Margaret stirred against her, making the small, purposeful sounds of a person who has requirements and intends to communicate them. Eleanor settled her daughter with the automatic competence of someone who has been doing something long enough that the body knows it before the mind does. Outside, the windmill turned. It had not squeaked since the night of their arrival. Nathan had oiled it and maintained it, and it ran clean and quiet, now the way things run when they are properly cared for. The garden was in its second season, established and generous. The porch post that had needed replacing in the first week was solid. The fences held. The cattle were 460 head up from the 400 that had survived the drought and would be more by spring. Silver Creek Ranch did not look like the same place Eleanor had seen from the road that first evening, sad and hollowed out and left behind by everything except stubbornness. It looked like what it was. A home that had been fought for by two people who had no business finding each other and had found each other anyway on a sun-baked platform in Red Creek, Arizona territory in the summer of 1884. On the north ridge under the cottonwood, Nathan's father had planted. The year he arrived, the land ran all the way to the creek and beyond. The boundary line held exactly where the 1874 survey said it held. The water ran free. The cottonwood was taller every year. Eleanor Carter, who had arrived on a train with $14 in her boot and a note that said she was not what anyone required, looked at her daughter and her husband and the lamp burning steady between them. And she knew with the quiet certainty of someone who has done the work and read the documents and told the truth in every room she entered that this was not luck. This was not rescue. This was what happens when one woman refuses to be turned away and one man is decent enough to be standing in the right place when it matters, and both of them are brave enough to choose each other. Not once, not in a single dramatic moment, but every single day, in every small, deliberate act of trust and honesty and shared work, until the choosing becomes the life itself. She picked up her pen. The September figures were good, better than good. She wrote the final number in the ledger in her clear, careful hand, added the column, and drew the line beneath it. Silver Creek Ranch was home. It had always been home. It had just been waiting for the right people to know it.